known and throughout this country. It's also known as a civil rights activist. It's a long-standing law too in the federal government in the United States.
I appreciate that. And I want to thank the Rotary Club for allowing me to come and speak. And certainly this club means a lot to our community when you're talking about helping the community and helping the community to be aware and to raise issues that are important to the people. So as Kenny said, we go way back. Myself, I did over 30 plus years in the US Marshals as a law enforcement officer. And I came from Washington, D.C. I just say that I'm born and raised here in Washington, D.C. I went to Marshall University in West Virginia. It has nothing to do with being a US Marshal. One's spelled with 2 L's, one's 1 L. But once I got on the job, and I'll say this too about my history a little bit in Washington, I came up in the civil rights movement. As a paper said, I just turned 70. So getting up there in age, man. But reality is that I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I always remember an incident because a lot of people ask me, what made you go forward and challenge the most powerful government in the world, more distinctly, the U.S. Department of Justice? And what would make you challenge that? And I remember an incident when I was a young kid. It was segregation in Washington, D.C., where we couldn't get in the boys club. Boys club was segregated, but as the blacks started to moving into the city, the whites started moving out into the suburbs. So pretty much, but they would bust back in and go to the boys club. But we, as the black kids living in that neighborhood, we couldn't come in. So we would play with these little white kids in front of the boys club and have a lot of fun. And then, but when that boys club would open up, we all go running up the steps together, and the man at the door would stop the black kids and allow the white kids to go on in. So one day, I accepted that for a while as a little kid, but then one day I went home and I asked my mother, why they won't let us in the club? I realized later in life when I was thinking about her answer, she was trying to tell me in such a way where she wouldn't break me. But she was telling me, son, there are laws on the books. We have to do what these laws tell us to do. She said, but they're abomination before God. And then what really got my attention, she looked out the window and then tears rolled down both sides of her face. I'm like, Mom, why are you crying? I don't need to go in the boys club. I don't really need that. She was like, son, don't you ever let nobody tell you you're not as good as any other kid. And then she said to me, maybe one day you'll make a difference. Well, I'm telling you, man, that mantra was laid on me from that moment on. And I remember when those kids went in the club, this one little redhead kid, me and him, we had so much fun. We were wrestling and playing around out there. When they ran in that club, he stopped. The other kids just ran on, but he stopped and he turned around and looked and saw these little black kids standing at the door looking at him. And he looked at me, as a look in his face says, man, I wish you could come in here with us. I really do. But I'm gonna go ahead and enjoy the privilege. He turned around and ran on into the club. So having said that, and then having been in Washington, D.C. when Dr. King came, and we were young and we followed them down to the monument. And I remember those words, I have a dream, and all of that, and just being a part. And I didn't really still understand racial segregation, the whole history of it, because I was young, but I was just kind of following along. But then one day I got locked up. And I got locked up when I was 18, and I was trying to help. I was working at the Safeway department store. A little kid just got strong arm robbery. Some boys beat him up, took his money. The boss said, he said, go, just call the police. The officer that came by knew me because the year before I worked as a summer youth at the police station. He took my name down as a witness, and another employee's name was a witness. He said, look, if we catch these guys, but you know that. I said, well, these young boys come around and try to harass this kid. I said, but I wouldn't know their names. I know their faces. No big deal. 2 months later, when I turned 18, they came to my house and locked me up, bringing me out of the house, handcuffs and everything. My mother's all upset. Come to find out, they made a mistake and pulled our names off, being the witnesses as the suspects. The white officer detective that was involved in it, I'm trying to explain to him, once he realized he had made the mistake, he still wanted me to say I did it so they could cover him. I was flabbergasted. They put me in jail for 3 days and I had to go through the court, DC lockup and all that. But that was a very important experience for me because all of that is what I was going to be doing in the future as a U.S. Marshal. Give you a little idea, the U.S. Marshals, we got 94 districts around the country. There's a head U.S. Marshal over each district, and our job is to protect the federal judicial system, meaning the court system. So it would be like the sheriff's department is in the local areas, ours is on the federal level. Protection of the judicial system, any processes, court warrants, everything comes out of that federal court. That's our job, as well as security. So basically, I'm going to be DC Superior Court at the time, well, it is today. U.S. Marshals handle all of that because DC is a quasi-federal city. So I'm going to be in the future, when I become a marshal, I'm going to be doing the exact same thing that I experienced. And trust me, you talking about deja vu all over. When I got to DC Superior Court as a marshal, and I'm seeing it, and if you came through and you said I didn't do it, I was really ready to believe you. I don't care who it was. When you said I didn't do it, because I know what I went through. But what really stands out for me, and you guys probably saw the paper, the Washington Post, and I've been in several papers. Right behind me, you see a sign that says Bigots with Badges. I've got a website out, bigotswithbadges.com. Blatant racism, the US Marshals Service. That came out in 1997 when I was on the job. And we thought the New York Post was going to do a little small story on us, but we were happy because we had filed complaints and we were alleging the discrimination was internal and was pretty pervasive. So when the New York Post came out with that story, it was a Sunday morning edition, March of 1997. And I'll never forget, because I was down here in DC and my white partner up in New York, he was jogging. And he stopped and called me up. And I really thought somebody was robbing him and beating him up because the way he was sounding on the phone. He was, oh my God, oh man, Matthew, I can't believe it. Oh, they're going to get us. They're going to kill us, because he was really concerned about the retribution. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, I'm saying to him, pull your gun out. Because I'm thinking he's being robbed. I'm like, shoot him. I'm saying this to him, right? Then he goes, Bigots with Badges, Bigots with Badges. It's all over the front page. And when he said that, all of a sudden it hit. They did the story and they did that. Who would come against the U.S. Department of Justice with such a powerful slogan? And they ran that story for 3 whole days. And you can go up on my website and see it. The news is up there and everything. But if you had told me back then that we would have been fighting this discrimination my whole career. I filed my first EEO complaint in 1985. I stopped a white chief deputy from becoming the head U.S. presidential appointee marshal for the DC Superior Court, a guy named Ronald Hine. I filed a complaint against everybody else was saying the man was discriminatory, but nobody wanted to challenge him. And everybody was telling me, Fogg, don't do it. You're most likely to succeed. You come on board in 1978 with a 4-year degree in criminal justice administration. You got you're tall, you got the voice, step away from the vehicle, all of that. They was like, don't challenge it, man. They said, just go with the program. And then when you become the head director or get in top, then you can make a difference. But God was saying to me, I didn't put you there to wait till you get to the top, because it's going to be a lot of bodies, a lot of people going to be hurting and down and out. But let me tell you something, when you make a decision like this, and especially in law enforcement, because I tell people all the time, in law enforcement, we can get away with murder. I think it was Chief Justice Warren, one of them said that the police officer on the street has more power than the president of the United States, because he has the right to forfeit your life, your property, and it was one of your life, your property, and your freedom, your life, property, and freedom at the drop of a dime, pretty much in a second. So what he was just saying was that's the power a police officer has on the street. And I've always told people that. I said, listen, on that street, people always try to talk about, well, how do we deal with law enforcement? How do we adjust to it? I said, with the type of power that we have, if I say you did it, most likely they're going to say you did it. Whether you had the drugs on you or whether they was laying on the side and we planted them on you. And I saw a lot of that. You see that, you see the way we would construe the law, because in some ways, when you get into this line of work, especially when I came on board, The issue was get your numbers up, make the arrest, get people locked up so we can show that we're warring on crime. The problem was we were just only doing it in Black neighborhoods. When I came on board, very seldom did you get a chance to lock up somebody white. And when they started this whole war on drugs, it was really targeting Blacks, and I was a part of it. I tell people we built one of the largest criminal justice complexes, the world is industrial complexes the world has ever seen on the backs of African Americans, and that war on drugs. 80% of those people that was in those prisons for drugs was people of color. So if you imagine it was happening within my department, then imagine all over the country, everybody was getting hired and they say, go after the weakest link. The Blacks can't really defend themselves. They don't have the attorneys, they don't have the lawyers, none of that stuff. And one of my bosses even told me, I said, listen, I'm over here now, been assigned to DEA. I said, we're going up Potomac. Don't they use drugs out Potomac and Springfield, something? He said, matter of fact, according to the national crime statistics and all of the research they've done, there's far more drugs in the white neighborhoods than there were in the Black neighborhoods, and easy access. I learned more about drugs and getting drugs when I got to Marshall University, a predominantly white university, than I ever learned growing up in Washington, D.C. So, but the emphasis was all of the managers were white, and they said, listen, if you go out there, those people will challenge you. They know judges, lawyers, politicians, they will challenge you. So the idea was just go to the weakest link, get your numbers up. They're still selling drugs. And that's when I had to tell my boss, I said, well, that's called ethnic cleansing. I said, because if this is not an equal opportunity enforcement operation, then I'm a slave hunter. Then what you have done, you have turned me into basically what history said, you just made me a slave hunter. That's why I decided to name my book, Bigots With Badges, The Road to Damascus. Because if you understand that whole Christian story, Paul would have been a US Marshal for the Roman Empire. I mean, if you really looked at what his job was, and he did it well. But one day God turned him around and said, why does thou persecute my people? Well, he did the same with me. And one day I had to take a stand. A lot of people objected to it, didn't want me to do it because they wanted to see me go up. And everybody understood what retribution you would have to deal with, even if it is the premier law enforcement agency in the country, even if it's the premier integrity, the US Department of Justice integrity. And let me tell you something, the demons came out, and they came out in full force. And I tell people, I said, when you talk about demons and devils, and I'm saying, when I say devils, not to make it very clear to people, not just talking about white people or whatever, I'm saying black, yellow, red, it doesn't matter. If you come against the human and the civil rights of people, you are a demon. And we need to acknowledge that. So what I started understanding was, in my position was, you have to take a stand and you cannot wait. No more than someone waits for cancer to leave their body or whatever. There are a lot of things that can fall upon us, but when God calls you out, you got to hear the call. And that's why when I was in New York City, when the planes was hitting the building, that evening, I went up there with my fiance, planes hitting the building that morning, and I was already out. I was challenging the government. I was out on workers' comp. I was in the midst of legal battles. And when those buildings dropped, I had been a member of the SWAT team and all that. So I had all of this specialized training, first responder training. I said, I can't stand by and watch that. So it happened to be an Army surplus store across the street. I went over and got me fatigues, everything. And next thing you know, and when I left my fiance, she was sitting in the room crying because she said, you're not coming back. They will kill you. Something will happen. Why are you going to get involved in it? And I said, if I don't come back, you tell my family and everyone else, this is above and beyond the call of duty. So the reality of it is, in this process, is I was always making decisions. And when I went into the danger zone, everybody was running away from those buildings in New York. Y'all can imagine the pandemonium and what it was like to see two huge buildings catastrophically drop. And so when I was running, going in that direction, next thing I know, I'm down there and I'm helping people, dust and stuff everywhere. Next thing I know, my pictures in People's Magazine, bringing the body of a firefighter down off the hill who was dead. And us pulling me and some other firefighters and all of that. So God was raising me up because he knew what I was doing and that it was going to always be somebody that's going to want to discredit me. when I went to trial in 1998, they was doing everything to keep me from going to trial because we got a federal judge involved in this thing. He was the director of the Marshal Service, a guy named Michael K. Moore. He pulled my name off the top of a cert list and put the last guy on the cert list over me after a black man had chosen me. Well, of course, that became part of my discrimination complaint. That went all the way to the jury, federal jury in Washington, D.C. The jury found him to be a discriminating official. Well, he's now the chief judge of the Southern District of Miami. Michael K. Moore, he's on the bench now. He's the chief judge. Can you imagine all the black lives he's affected? So what I'm saying to you is that when you take a stand, you have to, sometimes I hear the churches, and I'm a God-fearing man. I believe in the blood of the Lamb, but I know, and I believe this, and I say this all the time. A lot of times the churches that everybody talks about God's, power and anointing and go forward like David, but let Goliath show up and watch how many people run. And it reminds me just of what happened when Israel did the same thing. And they put out a decree and little David shows up and takes care of this business. So the reality of it is that's what we have to look at our lives. And that's where I was at. I had to make that determination over and over and over again. Matthew, do you go the distance? How far does this take you? My life was threatened. Everything. My fiance left me and daughter, all of them said, listen, you're not going to get us killed. These people will hurt you. And if you go to my website, you'll see a picture of a white guy holding up a rat that was given him by a manager. That manager was later promoted to head our internal affairs division of the whole United States Marshals Service. The black guy on the other side of me got killed later. Somebody ran his car up the road and broke his neck. So all of us had filed complaints. This is no easy task. When you take in on, you hear of these departments like New York City, Chicago, and Miami, you hear officers come forward and blow the whistle and say, whoa, this is terrible. We need to say something about it. Well, try doing it in the feds and watch what happens. Here it is today. Now you saw the article, I think Kenny sent it around, but here it is today. In the 20th January, and the Washington Post comes out and says, after 27 years, they may be near trial. That's utterly ridiculous to say you're in a law enforcement agency and it's taken so long to resolve those issues because you had people over there that dug their heels in and said, we cannot let them win because if we let them win, then it'll show that somehow we're weak or that discrimination really does exist. So I had to be the leader. I had to step up to the plate. I filed that class action in 1994. And here it is 27 years later, and we're still dealing with it and still trying to decide how to deal with it. They've settled, the Secret Service had a class, FBI had a class, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. These law enforcement agencies had class actions, all of them, the DL, Drug Enforcement Administration, all of them resolved. This one still goes on. So it shows you the level of what I call the culture of indifference that's within this agency that says, we are the Justice Department, we can't have this on our watch. But yet, when I won that verdict in 1998, and that jury came back and said, we find in the civil action of Matthew Fogg versus the mighty US Department of Justice that you violated 13 out of 15 of his civil rights. And we find the whole United States Marshal Service to be a racial hostile environment for all of its African-American deputy US Marshals. That's court record. That's what the jury verdict came back and found that the position that the judge, who's now the judge, when he was the director, pulled me off. They said that was a discriminatory move. So the point I'm making here, ladies and gentlemen, is you have to know when to go above and beyond the call of duty. You got to know when to take a stand. And I think that's been the whole issue of our history. When do people take a stand? And what's going to happen? We don't know. I didn't know I would last this long. I didn't know if somehow they'd figure out a way to put me in jail, kill me, do something to me, set me up. These are all the things that I know factually can happen. So people have asked the question, why did you go that distance? Why did you take so long? Why didn't you just give in? Because God said, claim the land, take the land, and I'll be with you, and stand still and see my salvation. So I believed in it. I stood on that promise. And here I am today talking to you, giving you just a quick synopsis of the story and how, and all of the accolades. I mean, like Kenny said, oh, I was good at my job. I locked up a lot of people. I went out to some very dangerous fugitives that would kill you in a heartbeat. And God just put his hedge around me. So I had a record full of accolades. So when we got to trial, they could not discredit me on that area. So we came to a point, and I'll leave you with this point because I think, how much time do I have? I don't want to go over my time. You would say what, about what?
2 more minutes.
About 2 more minutes, Lord.
How about 3? Okay, and then we'll do Q&A.
Okay, well, anyway.
Some time for Q&A.
Sure. Excuse me. They was trying to get me to settle. Justice Department, 3 United States attorneys and my attorney in the room. They had an offer. They said, we got an offer here we don't think you can refuse. I looked at that offer. I said, this is a good offer. My attorney says it's a good offer. I said, I want you to do one other thing. He said, what's that, Fogg? I said, I want you to admit you're discriminating against the other African-Americans, and so we can fix this whole system. He rubbed his head back and said, why are you concerned about those other blacks? He said, don't you know you're out here by yourself? This was back in '98. He said, it's time you take care of you. And everything he started saying to me, I heard from friends, foe, family, everybody. So the reality of it was I said, maybe he's right, God. Maybe this is where I ended. I said, hand me the papers. He slid the papers across the table. Had he kept his mouth shut, I would not have gone forward. But he walks around the table, puts his hand on my shoulder, and he says to me, Fogg, you're making a very wise decision. He said, you remind me of a black female. She was just like you. She wanted to fix the system. He said, I know we represent the government against her. He said, and she decided to take us into court. He said she lost her case and everything she had. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked up at him, and that's when I saw them tears roll right down my mother's face. When I looked at him, I saw her face saying, one day you're me. And all of a sudden I said, you didn't put me here, God did, and God will deliver me. And when I left, my attorney tapped me on the shoulder. I said a few other things. He tapped me on the shoulder and he said, Matt, you said what you had to say. He said, let's go. 3 months later, I came back. We got a landmark decision from a federal jury. So that's my story pretty much, and how we wind up where we are today. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. That's a great story that you just told. And I understand earlier you said you had written some books, so I didn't know if the books were the story that you told, or there were different stories. But I guess my more important question, and you may or may not be able to answer this, but I want to know who's going to play you in the movie. Can you tell us that part?
That's so funny, man, you asked that, because I've had several people come. I said, I'm going to play me. But you know, we all laugh. We say Denzel Washington or somebody like, because you're right. I believe it's going to be a movie. It's going to be a story. I mean, it's just so, this thing has gone on so long, and there's so many aspects to this story that it's just unbelievable, you know. So thank you for that question. Yes, we're going to figure that one out, but it just might be me.
You or Denzel, one or the other. Lisa?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for speaking today. I think it's very important that this story is told, but my question has to do with your education, because I know that it was very difficult with all that was going on in this country during the time of education for a person of color. And it was there were some landmark decisions made and such, and there were some that were crippled in certain areas. And I just wanted to know from you, first of all, how are you going about educating Black youth on your story, besides through your book? And are you,
Right.
you know, speaking? The second part is, how did you circumvent that teaching, that educational system that afforded you the lack of education during your time to get you to the point that you are now? And I thank you for your story.
Well, you know, it's a journey to justice, sort of, say to speak, when you're doing all of this. Now, one of the things I look back on, I didn't really start a family in the traditional way, because the fear was, you know, you're going to get hurt. Somebody's going to kill you, or they're going to set you up. That was always in my book. I said I was trained to go after people who they trained me to apprehend, but I was also looking both ways. I had to look behind me, always concerned about who was going to not back me up. And there was a stakeout that I was on where they left me, and the man was trying to pull a gun out, and I'm holding the gun in his pocket to keep him killing him. It was America's Most Wanted. But the education piece is, you know, just doing it as I go along and continuing to push forward for that. And I've talked to many groups and college students, and I always kind of leave them with that message I left you guys. You got to be willing to go above and beyond the call of duty. In a sense, in your life, you have to take a stand, because if we didn't take stands, we wouldn't even have the gains that we made now. And the problem that we're seeing is that a lot of the institution is beginning to back up and backtrack and take the gains that we have made away from us. And that's the only reason why a case would last this long when you talk about the US Department of Justice, the organization that you would figure would have fixed it immediately. So if they don't fix it, everybody else has their marching orders. So to answer your question, yes, I mean, it was a difficult thing, but I have told many, and I said, listen, when the challenges in life come to you, that's when you got to step up to the plate and say, look, I'm not going to let this stop me, but you got to have some type of spiritual base or something in your background. My parents were both Pentecostal. We came up, you know, in the church where you couldn't, you know, the women couldn't wear dresses above their knees and couldn't have their toes out and all of that stuff, you know, and, you know, all of the traditional ways. So that's what I came up, tearing for the Holy Ghost and all that, but that stood with me. So I hope that answers your question or something.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So, would you give us again the title of your book?
Well, the book is not out just yet, but it's Bigots
Oh, it's
with
not.
Badges.
It's not. Okay.
No, but it's going to be Bigots with Badges, The Road to Damascus.
That's easy.
Yeah.
All right. And when are you expecting, when do you hope to?
Good question,
have it
man. I've been
published?
expecting it out for the last 20 years, but I'm about to finish it now. We're at the what you might say at the ending point. I wanted to see what's going to happen with us, whether we're going to end up going to trial in this case or whether we're going to settle. Right now, there are some settlement discussions going on, but if it doesn't seem to work out, then I'm just going to go forward with it and get it out and make sure that the public sees. If you go to my website, there's a lot of information up on there, bigotswithbadges.com. And you can see a lot of information up there. So, and a lot of the videos, I've been like Kenny said, I've been on CNN, MSNBC, RT, you just name it, all of these shows were, and a lot of times they had me on there as an analyst to analyze, you know, shootings, school shootings, you name it. But then now I'm getting more into the racial aspect of talking about how can racism and Black Lives Matter and this man who put his knee on the neck. I tell everybody, if them guys had pushed him off and what's the name had to survive, and George Floyd had to survive, they'd put shaving off. And Floyd, I said, they would have brought those guys up on charges. I can tell you here and now, but because George Floyd died, now they're being charged. But a lot of people in law enforcement, we see bad officers, we know who the bad apples are. The problem is the system is such that you don't report bad apples or you become the bad apple. So that's the way out, and that's what we need to work to change. And that's where I was making the difference to say, I know you want to paint me as a bad apple, but God is going to raise me up no matter what. So that's why I've taken this.
Thank you.
Dr. Fogg, I want to,
Kenny.
Dr. Fogg, yes. Dr. Fogg, I really would like to thank you for your great story, your heroes, trials and tribulations. So Matthew, what's fortune for you? Where are you going now? I just want to mention Rotary's not really a political organization, but I know you had mentioned that you had some aspirations about maybe running for Congress.
That's right. Yes. Thanks for that, Kenny. Yeah, I'm planning on putting in for the seat that for Congress in Maryland's 4th district that Anthony Brown, he was the former congressman, he's going for the attorney general seat. So that seat is that office is now open. So I'm planning on putting in for that. And I ran for it before when Anthony Brown got it. And with the Washington Post, that article out there has helped my name to, continue to resonate.
Excellent. Okay. Well, good luck with that. And
Thank you.
As Kenny said, we can't endorse anybody as
Right, I understand.
Rotarians, but well, this has been really very insightful and brought us close to the realities that you and many others have faced, in your service as marshals. And I guess I know you haven't been doing it by yourself, I hope, and that you've had some others. So that was kind of the last question. We do have to close now. But is there kind of an association of former marshals who worked with you?
Well, we've got the class action, which right now involves thousands.
Yeah, so everyone involved with
So that we got that. And then, of course, my organization, Congress Against Racism and Corruption in Law Enforcement, we're trying to build on that right now. So we got several whistleblower networks that we're connecting with as US Marshals and other law enforcement people to say, this is a culture problem that we've got to address all across America. So we might as well start it with the US Marshals since they've gone the longest with with this type of litigation.
Understood. Well, Dr. Fogg, it's been a real pleasure to have you. And we, as a club, for the last 30 years, had a tradition of planting a tree to honor each of our speakers. And if we were in person, I'd be handing you a tree certificate as our pledge to do so. We're hoping to do our next tree planting ceremony in sometime in the spring. Usually it's in May. So you will be invited to that, and we'll actually be able to tell you the location of your tree. We plant
wow.
And we do this in partnership with the National Park Service, which means it will be on federal property. It's usually somewhere
It's gonna be a
near the
fig
tidal
tree?
basin.
It's going to be a fig tree. I'm just thinking of Bible, but go ahead. It's
Yeah,
okay.
it'll be a native tree if it's planted in one of the downtown parks, or it could be a cherry blossom tree planted near the tidal basin. Yeah, so you will know once the National Park Service lets us know exactly where the trees have been planted.
Wow.
So it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. And we will now adjourn the meeting.